Well, hey there, good morning, and welcome to Graceway. John Thompson is going to be up in a moment to share this week's message entitled Relationships from 2 Samuel. But first, we wanted to let you know about a few upcoming events happening here at Graceway. Registration for Graceway's Engage classes have begun online. The Introduction to Biblical Missions course is going to give you a comprehensive understanding of God's global mission, and it's rooted in His nature and motivated by His glory. You're going to learn how to see the world in terms of peoples and cultures and grapple with both the challenges and opportunities of communicating the gospel across cultures. This class begins on January 27th at 7 p.m. It's going to be taught by Jeff Adams. For a complete listing of all our Engage classes, you can go to visitgraceway.org/engage. Baptisms are a public statement of your decision to follow Jesus Christ, and it's a visible witness to what has occurred invisibly through the Holy Spirit. And our next baptism service is on February 2nd. If you're interested in being baptized in either of our services, we encourage you to go to visitgraceway.org/baptisms. Sign up today. Finally, today at 3 p.m., we're going to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of the beloved community, a place in which poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be allowed to continue because community members will not allow it. So join us at 3 p.m. today for the MLK Today celebration. It's going to include a keynote presentation from Carrie Casey, the CEO of the National Center for Fathering, and an award ceremony for our kindergarten through 12th grade essay contestants. Again, thank you for joining us today. If you'd like more information about any of these events or other activities happening at Graceway, we encourage you take a look at the bulletin, or you can also visit our website, visitgraceway.org. Finally, you can also check out our iPhone and Android apps.
My name is John Thompson, and I am the Director of Peace Partnership. We are a small nonprofit counseling center that is primarily geared towards providing education, parent education, and also mental health services to financially disadvantaged individuals and families. I am a Calvary graduate. I graduated from Calvary Bible College, and Calvary taught me something very, very useful. It taught me how to love the Bible. I've always loved the human mind, and I've always loved how the human mind works, but Calvary really taught me a love for theology. One of the things that I really like are all of these stories in the Bible. You know, God is very concerned with the process of things. He is concerned with the product, but the process of things is very important to God. So we are going to look at one of the stories in the Bible, one of these dramas in the Bible. I'm a counselor. You guys would be a little bit disappointed if I didn't talk about a little bit of drama this morning. So if you would turn in your Bibles to 2 Samuel, excuse me, we are going to pick it up. We're going to be looking at Absalom's rebellion. We're going to pick it up in chapter 12, verses 10 through 12, because there's something here that we need to kind of get a hold of and file away in our memory. It's going to be useful later on. Before we get started, though, there are some key players in this drama, and we're just going to kind of take a brief overview and look through Absalom's rebellion. And there is a little-known biblical character in there that I really want to focus on this morning. His name is Hitha Fell. And he was both David and Absalom's counselor at a certain time in both of their lives. So let's look at a couple of the key players in this story. The first one is David. I've entitled this part, "With family like this, who needs enemies?" David, if you don't know anything about David's life, it can be encapsulated in one sense, it can be encapsulated in one word: dysfunction. Massively dysfunctional home life. In some ways, he was an absentee landlord. I mean, he committed adultery and murder within a matter of months. Okay, the guy, in one aspect, was a man after God's own heart, but in another aspect, he was a total mess. He was king of Israel at the time of this story. He had ruled for about 7 or 7.5 years from Hebron, and then had moved his seat of power to Jerusalem. and he is ruling from Jerusalem at the time of this story. He is Absalom's father. 2 Samuel chapter 11 is the story of David and Bathsheba, and I want you to file that away in your memory as well, because that will become useful later on. Okay, let's look at 2 Samuel 12, verses 10 through 12. This is the prophecy that Nathan leveled against David after the entire David and Bathsheba debacle had come to light. So now the sword will never depart from your house, for you have despised me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite as your own. This is what the Lord says: I am about to bring disaster on you from inside your own household. Right before your eyes, I will take your wives and hand them over to your companion. He will lie with your wives in broad daylight. Although you have acted in secret, I will do this thing before all Israel and in broad daylight. So remember that. Remember that prophecy. It's going to become useful later on. Absalom is another key player in this story. Absalom's name, ironically, means father of peace. He didn't bring a lot of peace in his life, but that's what his name means. He was the third of 6 sons from one of David's wives named Maacah, and he was Tamar's brother. Now, Tamar is going to, that whole situation, I'll tell you a little bit about that, but that is going to be a pivotal thing in this whole story as well. Tamar actually was raped by her half-brother Amnon. And Absalom and Tamar were very close, and we'll see that Absalom did not get over that. Absalom was born in Hebron while David was ruling there, and he was known as a very, very handsome man. The Bible has this to say about Absalom in 2 Samuel 14:25. We're going to be doing a lot of turning of pages, so warm your fingers up, okay? 2 Samuel 14:25 says this: Now in all of Israel, everyone acknowledged that there was no man as handsome as Absalom. From the soles of his feet to the top of his head, he was perfect in appearance. So this is one good-looking guy, okay? Hushai is another person that we're going to need to know about. He wasn't he didn't play a huge role, but we need to know about him. He was a close friend and a trusted ally of David. He was fiercely loyal, and later on he became a spy for David. He infiltrated Absalom's ranks and would report back to David. And now we come to our main character, Ahithophel. Ahithophel was a chief counselor to both David and Absalom at different times. He was a man of extraordinary insight and wisdom. There's some really fascinating things that are written about this guy. The Talmud, which is a central text in rabbinic Judaism, it contains teachings from thousands of rabbis on all kinds of different subjects. It has this to say about Ahithophel. He was, quote, a man whose great wisdom was not received in humility as a gift from heaven, and so became a stumbling block to him. He was one of those who, while casting longing eyes upon things not belonging to him, also lost the things he possessed. What an awful footnote to your life. Just failing to realize your purpose in life. The Haggadah, which is another Jewish text that primarily deals with Passover Seder, explains that Ahithophel was misled by his immense knowledge of astrology into believing that he would become king of Israel. So all throughout this story, there is this very thick thread of jealousy. Ahithophel is always a counselor to the king, but he was never the king himself. And he never really got over that. We'll see how that works on later on. Okay, so let's get into this. I've entitled this part, Lost Potential, Failing to Find Your Meaning in Life. And before we start looking at this, if you would turn to 2 Samuel 15, we'll pick that up. And as you're turning there, let's answer one pivotal question. If we know better, why don't we do better? Legitimate question, right? It's been my experience that that question can be answered in this way. because the problem is not solely an intellectual one. It is not solely a problem of education. It's not as though I can give you, and you guys have all heard this, right? Tools for the toolbox. Those are great. That's fine. But a lot of times overcoming problems is a difficult thing because that's not solely what it's about. We'll see how that plays out in this story. Okay, so 2 Samuel 15. This is Absalom's revolt. Now, why would Absalom revolt? He's a prince. He's a king's son. He's got everything. Well, remember Tamar's situation? Absalom never got over that. David didn't do anything about the rape of Tamar. And David lost credibility in the eyes of Absalom for not doing anything, for not handling the situation. David was really kind of an absentee landlord. Note to you fathers, handle your business. For 2 years, Absalom's anger grew and it grew against Amnon until he had him killed in 2 Samuel 13. Do you ever feel like you just haven't gotten justice for something? There's been a wrong done to you, and you just haven't gotten justice for it? Friends, one of the hardest things that has been a lesson in my life that I would encourage you to learn to take a punch in life. Learn to take a punch and dust yourself off and move on, because it is common to us all, even the king's son. Okay, verses 3 through 5. This is how Absalom gained momentum and was able to revolt, to stage this coup against David. Verses 3 through 5 tells us that the king's son would go and he would stand at the city gates and he would embrace commoners. Now, this is a tremendously influential behavior, because not only is this guy really good looking and handsome, but this is the king's son doing these things. So this is hugely influential, and in verse 6 we see the natural outcome. He stole the hearts of the people. He won the hearts of the people over. In verses 10 and 11 we see a little glimpse into Absalom's true character, though. He was very dishonest. He was deceitful. He took people from Jerusalem back to Hebron, and he lied to them. He tricked them in order to go with him. Verse 12 is where we get our first glimpse of Hitha Fell. And verses 13 through 15 is where David finds out about the plot to murder him, and he flees Jerusalem. He takes off. Why would David flee Jerusalem? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is what we saw in the previous verses. Absalom had won the hearts of the people. David knew, man, everybody loves Absalom. This is not going to go well for me. In addition to that, there is some historical context that you need to be aware of. David had made Jerusalem, he had really turned Jerusalem into a spiritual center at the time. And so he didn't want to see it destroyed. In addition, the Ark of the Covenant was there. And so you can imagine that there is a whole lot of anxiety over having the Ark of the Covenant destroyed as well. So David says, you know what? We're not going to have this. I don't want Jerusalem destroyed. We're out of here. And he takes off. In verses 30 and 31, David finds out that Ahithophel is a conspirator against him. And it says something very interesting in verses 30 and 31, that David, as he went along, he prayed against Ahithophel. Now, this is a pretty influential thing, to pray for someone's failure. Usually we pray for positive things. Well, in the next chapter, we'll see why. Okay, so 2 Samuel 16, we'll pick it up. There's some things that happen in the first part that really aren't relevant to our story. So we'll pick it up in verses 15 through 19. Verses 15 through 19 is our friend Hushai. And this is Hushai successfully infiltrating Absalom's inner circle. So here's basically what happens. David flees Jerusalem. He figures out, Absalom's after me, I gotta go. So he flees, takes a bunch of people with him. Absalom comes into Jerusalem thinking, I'm going to fight my dad. He doesn't fight his dad. He just marches into Jerusalem. When he gets there, he finds Hushai. And he basically says to Hushai, some friend you are. You serve my dad, you're this loyal friend, and yet you just give him up just like that? And Hushai is a very, very slippery character. Here's what he says. He says, oh no, Absalom, I serve who the Lord has appointed and who these people have appointed over the king of Israel. So he kind of appeals to his pride a little bit. Isn't that a great answer? So he kind of wins over Absalom. And so Absalom says, okay, great. I'll buy it. He takes the bait. You can, be involved in my side of things. And then he turns to Ahithophel and says, what now? What do we do now? In verses 20 and 21, we see what Ahithophel does. And Ahithophel gives some kind of, on the outward appearance, it kind of seems like strange advice. He says, so Absalom says, Ahithophel, what should I do? And Ahithophel says, David, when he left Jerusalem, he left 10 concubines behind to look over the palace. Go sleep with them. Okay. Why is this significant? This is significant because Jewish law dictated this was a crime punishable by death. There's no coming back from this. If Absalom does this, it's done. And what he is doing is he's showing the people of Jerusalem, I do not fear my father. I am king now, not him. Now remember Nathan's prophecy that we read about in the beginning? We're seeing it fulfilled right here. God has raised someone up within David's own family to do these things. Absalom wanted to show the people that he just wasn't afraid of his father, but he failed to realize, this is going to be kind of a downfall for him. He failed to realize a very important principle in life, and that is this. You can choose your choices, but very rarely can you choose the consequence for those choices. So choose wisely. Be very careful. In verses 23, we see why David prayed against Ahithophel in the previous chapter. This is a tremendous statement that the Bible makes about Ahithophel. So look at 2 Samuel 16:23. In those days, Ahithophel's advice was considered as valuable as a prophetic revelation. Holy smoke. Both David and Absalom highly regarded the advice of Ahithophel. This guy's advice was spotless. If you prayed and asked God for something, it was the same as going and asking Ahithophel. Wow. That is something to say. So now we know why David takes this so seriously when he hears that Ahithophel is a conspirator against him. Well, chapter 17 is the debate for David's life. So chapter 16 ends, chapter 17 begins, and they're standing around there in Jerusalem, and in verses 1 through 4, Ahithophel goes to Absalom and he says, hey, look, David's on the ropes. He's tired, he's hungry, he's worn out. Allow me to take 12,000 men. I'll go after him. I will kill the king alone, and I will round up all of the people that are with him. I'll bring him back to Jerusalem. No harm, no foul, no war. Everything will be fine. Well, Absalom thinks about it, but then he remembers Hushai. And this is another very pivotal point for Absalom. It was his undoing. So Absalom sends for Hushai and says, hey, you know my dad. You were close to him for a while. Give us your advice. What do you think? So in verses 5 and 6, Absalom questions Hushai. This is what Ahithophel said. What do you say we should do? And in verses 7 through 13, Hushai says, I don't know. Your dad's a pretty tough guy. He's a warrior, and he's got a bunch of warriors with him. And I'm afraid that if you send Ahithophel and these guys after him, it's not going to turn out so well for you. You could lose your first battle really quick. And again, Hushai appeals to his sense of pride and his sense of self-worth. That's what pride is. Pride is self-deceit. You believe yourself something that you're not. And so he appeals to his sense of pride. And he says, Hushai tells Absalom, You need to round up all the men of Israel, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and you need to lead your men into battle, and you need to annihilate all of the conspirators, all of the people who are against you. And doesn't that sound great? Right? Oh, yeah. So Absalom, he believes Hushai. Now, it's important to note that verse 14, take a look at verse 14. Absalom believes Hushai not because Hushai is right, but because God intervened. God chose to frustrate the advice of Ahithophel. In verse 23, we'll pick it up, we see the natural outcome of Ahithophel's advice not being heeded. Ahithophel saddles his donkey, travels back to his hometown of Gilo, puts his house affairs in order, and commits suicide. Now, why would this guy, you're probably thinking, John, you told me this guy is so smart. This doesn't sound very bright to me. Well, Ahithophel knew he was right. He is a very smart guy. He knew that he was right, and he knew that if Absalom did not heed his advice, he was doomed to failure. Can you identify with that? Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like you've seen the death of some of your dreams, the things you want to accomplish in life? Death can be a very, very effective life motivator. Here's how. The physicality of death itself will end us. But the idea of death can motivate us to live a better life. Because does the Bible not say it is appointed once for man to die? So use your life, your only life, well. Ahithophel, in all of his knowledge and all of his wisdom, he failed to understand that concept. Well, 2 Samuel 18 is Absalom takes Hushai's advice. He leads him into battle. He gets beat. And ironically, it is his beautiful hair that helped him secure his popularity that gets caught in the low-hanging branches of a tree. And he died in a really weird way. And his hair gets caught in these branches, and he hangs there by his hair until some soldiers see him and go and tell Joab, who was the leader of David's army. And Joab goes and finishes him off with a spear. So that's how the king's son dies. That's how Absalom died in 2 Samuel 18. Now let's take a look at Ahithophel for a minute. I told you he was a main character in this. Why is he a main character? Well, let's take a look. I've entitled this part of our study, Lost Potential, Failing to Recognize Your Purpose in Life. Many people do that. Why did Ahithophel side with Absalom? Wasn't he David's counselor? And furthermore, why does Ahithophel have so much hatred for David? Well, like most things in life, the devil's in the details. So let's take a look at this. Turn to 2 Samuel 23:34. 2 Samuel 23 is a description and a genealogical lineage of David's 30 mighty men. It kind of gives us a description of them, and it gives a lineage of who they are. And we're only going to concern ourselves with one verse. And we're only going to concern ourselves with one verse because I know everybody in here is really into biblical genealogies. I know you guys go home and study that all the time. So we'll just read one verse here. So, verse 34 says, Eliphelet, the son of Ahasbai, the son of Maacathite, and Elam, the son of... Oh, there's our man again. Interesting. Ahithophel, the Gilonite. Okay, now keep that little piece of knowledge in there. Keep that little bit of knowledge. And turn back a couple chapters to 2 Samuel 11. This is the story of David and Bathsheba. Everyone knows the story of David and Bathsheba, and we really only need to concern ourselves for our purposes here this morning with one verse. And that is verse 3. So look at verse 3. 2 Samuel 11:3. So David sent someone to inquire about the woman, talking about Bathsheba. The messenger said, Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Oh, some of you are putting the pieces together already, aren't you? Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather. And now you know why Ahithophel has so much hatred for David. Chances are that Uriah, Bathsheba's husband that David had killed, were very close friends. They worked in such close proximity to one another that they had to have known each other, not to mention being family. I mean, this is his granddaughter's husband. Ahithophel was David's primary counselor, and so he would have had to have known about David's behavior with Bathsheba. How many of your translations here have verse 3 ending in a question mark? Yeah. It could very well be that unknowingly, David sent Ahithophel to go inquire about his own granddaughter. Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? David, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What's going through that little head of yours? Ahithophel was so angry that he most likely quit his prestigious job as the counselor's or the king's chief counselor, because when Absalom sends for Ahithophel, he's not with David. He's in his hometown. And it appears that Ahithophel said, you know what? I've had enough, David. I'm done. And he leaves. And he committed suicide in 2 Samuel 17:23 because he lost sight of his purpose in life. One of the worst things you can die with is potential. You can die with a lot of things, but ladies and gentlemen, you do not want to die with a sense of unused life. You don't want to do that. It will overtake you, just that sense of bitterness. So how do you find your purpose in life? How do you find meaning in life? As a counselor, I'm asked that quite a bit. Finding your purpose in life, I have found in my experience, finding your purpose in life is less about doing and more about being. And here's why. Because doing comes from being. The Bible speaks about this in very explicit terms. Out of a person's heart, the mouth speaks. Right? What is inside of you will come out. It's not out of the heart, the mouth might speak. It will. What is inside of you will naturally come out. So if you are a certain way, you will do certain things. Being is a very, very important thing in finding your purpose in life. And one of the primary ways that you can be a certain type of person is through the use of empathy. Empathy can best be described as viewing something out the other person's window. There was a young lady who went through counseling. She had been locked in a bitter, bitter struggle with her father for many, many years. He was a glass half empty kind of guy, and she was very optimistic. She was, the glass couldn't even have anything in it, and she would say it was full. It was full of air. And that was just her. It was just a basic personality difference. Well, it had come time for her to go off to college. And her father had agreed to go with her. And she thought this was a very, very positive thing. She thought this would be a wonderful thing. We're going to be kind of a captive audience. Here he's going to be with me for several hours in the vehicle, and we'll be able to talk, be able to work some things out. Well, as they drove along on their way to college, her father could not stop talking about this dirty, nasty, littered stream by the side of the road. And something clicked, and she shut down. And she did not speak to her father for many years. And one time, as she came back from college, she took the same route home that she took with him that time. She refused to drive that route for many years because of all the negative emotions associated with it. And as she came home, as you're going someplace, the car is going this way. And as you come back, the car goes this way. And so her perspective was altered, and she saw things out her father's window, and she did notice indeed a dirty, nasty, littered stream by the side of the road. The problem is this: her father had died, and she was never able to discuss that with him. And for many months, she worked through that deep sense of guilt and that deep sense of regret, potential. And she worked through those things. So you can use that in your own life, just that idea of empathy. How does this person perceive the way I'm talking to them? How does this person perceive the way I'm treating them? Is this a positive thing? Is this making them better? Am I creating a better version of myself through doing this? Those are the types of things that we can learn from this study. The second thing is Nietzsche's idea or Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence. I read a lot of books, and sometimes I like old books better than new books because I think old books have kind of stood the test of time. And so I read a lot of books. I read some philosophy, and some of what I read comes from Nietzsche. Now, this is Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence. And the first time I read this, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. It kind of raised my anxiety level because I thought, what have I done with my life? And here's what it says. Read along silently as I read this aloud. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and everything small or great in your life will return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this moment, and I myself. The eternal hourglass of time will be turned upside down again and again, and you with it, you speck of dust. Would you throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who said this? Or have you experienced a tremendous life? And you would have answered him, you are a God, and never have I heard and you are a God, and never have I heard anything more divine. If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are now, or it would crush you. And the idea is this. The idea is that if you hate the idea of repeating your life as you have chosen to live it, there is only one explanation. You have not chosen to live your life aright, your only life. And I understand that as you think about the past, what happens to you is probably the same thing that happened to me. You become filled with regret. I am a counselor. I am not about filling you with regret. I am about moving you towards the future. I am about being positive. And so I would turn your attention towards your future because in one sense, the past is exactly that. It is the past. And even though it is set in concrete, there is nothing that we can do about it. But we can do things about our future. We cannot change or forget our past, but we can refuse to allow our past to have power over us, to control us, to guide us in our future. One of the ways that happened was, for me in my life, was I went to Calvary kind of in a rough state. I didn't come from a very good background. I became a Christian when I was 18, and this was my mindset of going to college and furthering my career, right? As I thought, I don't really know a lot about being a Christian, but why not go to a Bible college and I'll learn how to be a good Christian? Okay, great. So I go to Calvary, and I was immediately thrust into a different culture. I went to a Bible college. I didn't even know how many books were in the Bible. And there were people there students there, who had memorized entire books of the Bible. And I was really coming to grips with all of this different starting place in my life. Like these kids I thought they were starting clear up here, and I don't know where I'm at, but I can barely see where they are starting. And I was really kind of working through and wrestling with, can I do this? Can I be a good Christian? Can I get to where they are right now? And Mrs. Rayford was a dear, dear woman. She was a professor's wife. She's from Louisiana, so she was a very southern woman, very nice woman. She was a very sweet southern belle, ridiculous cooking. And I was in the cafeteria, going through the cafeteria line one evening, and she came up beside me, and you could tell I was working through some things. I was really wrestling with some things. And so she asked me what was wrong, and I told her. And this is what this is what she said to me. She said, "Are you a child of the King?" Well, of course, Mrs. Rayford. Yeah, I'm a Christian. And this is what she said to me. "Sweetheart, then you must act like it." And I always remembered that. If you are a Christian here today, you are a child of the one true King, just as Absalom was. And so I will leave you with Mrs. Rayford's words ringing in your ears just as they rang in mine so many years ago. So go act like it.